What if a single act of kindness could shatter your entire world of faith? What if the faces you respected, and even the church where you knelt to pray, were only curtains hiding the darkness behind them? In the harsh land of Wyoming, in the year 1880, Elias Boone, a farmer who lived by the Bible, stumbled upon a dying woman among the ashes of an old burned church. From that moment, he understood one horrifying truth. Sometimes the devil wears a Sunday robe. Come with me through 4 haunting chapters, because what Elias saw beneath that blanket will make you question faith, justice, and the very nature of humanity forever. If you are brave enough to face the truth, like this video, and let us begin. The wind of Wyoming howled across the barren fields as Elias Boone stepped out of his wooden cabin on a freezing October morning in 1884. At 40 years old, he was no stranger to brutal winters, but the heavy grey sky and the absolute silence that day made him shiver. Elias's ranch lay more than 10 miles, or about 16 kilometers, from the town of Ash Hollow, where the new railroad brought settlers and other things no one wanted to talk about. Since his wife, Eliza, had died from sickness, the house had known only the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, a sound that both soothed and haunted him. As he passed the barn, Elias noticed a small figure curled up on the blackened stones of the old church, the one that had been struck and shattered by lightning. "Is someone there?" he called out. No answer. He stepped closer and froze. A young woman, her dark hair tangled, her bare feet cracked and bleeding, trembling all over, clutching a torn blanket around herself. Elias knelt down. "Dear Lord," he whispered, when he saw her bruised face, her lips bleeding, and deep marks of strangulation on her neck. Her half-open eyes were cloudy and filled with terror, making him step back in shock. "It is all right," Elias said, his voice shaking. "You are safe now. My name is Elias Boone. I live nearby. He took off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and carried her home. Under the flickering firelight, she managed a few spoonfuls of soup before collapsing again, still clutching the blanket like it was the last thread holding her to life. Elias whispered softly, "You can stay here as long as you need. No one will hurt you anymore." For the first time, she nodded slightly. But when Elias went to bed, he could not stop wondering what kind of man could do this to another human being. And he did not yet know that his faith in God, in the church, and in mankind was about to be tested in the most merciless way. 3 days passed in cold silence. The woman Elias still did not know her name lay near the fireplace, clinging to her torn blanket as if it were her last armor against the world. On Thursday evening, Pastor Abram White came to visit. "Elias, I heard you have a stranger staying here." When he saw the girl, his tone softened. "My child, I have come to pray with you." But she flinched violently, pulling the blanket over her head. "Go away, please." Then the pastor stepped back, sadness in his eyes. "Perhaps she has been deeply wounded," he said quietly before leaving. Elias turned to her. "He is a good man. I trust him." The girl opened her eyes slightly and whispered, "That is what they all say about themselves." For the first time, a chill ran down Elias's spine. "What is your name?" "Clara." That night, Elias woke to the sound of muffled sobs. Clara trembled, speaking through tears. "The men who hurt me, they are the most respected men in this town." On Sunday morning, Elias sat in the church, listening to Pastor White preach about forgiveness. But as he looked around at the devoted faces, all he could hear echoing in his mind was, "The ones who pray the loudest are often the ones most guilty." The fever turned Clara into a shadow of herself. All night she muttered names that made Elias's blood run cold. Father White, Mayor Allen, Sheriff Doyle. Each name was a blade cutting into his faith. It could not be true yet. Every detail she described was too exact to deny. By Tuesday morning, Clara could barely breathe. Clara, I need to look at your wounds, or else. Do not look under the blanket, she begged. But when she fell unconscious, Elias could not stop himself. With trembling hands, he lifted the edge of the blanket, and his world collapsed. Clara's body was covered in lash marks, burns, and cuts. Beside her lay a torn piece of Pastor White's robe, a silver button from the mayor's coat, and a blood-stained sheriff's badge. A soaked leather notebook rested nearby, filled with dates, times, locations, and names. They prayed, Clara had written, and then they destroyed me. They said God would forgive, as long as I stayed silent. From Elias dropped to his knees, his tears falling on the pages. When Clara opened her eyes faintly, he whispered, I believe you. And in that moment, Elias's faith died only to be reborn as a vow to bring justice in blood. By dawn, Clara was still alive. Her face was hollow but peaceful. Elias gently dressed her wounds for the first time. She allowed him to touch her. What will you do with what you know? She asked. Elias said nothing. The notebook was proof, but who could he report it to when the sheriff, the mayor, and the pastor were all the guilty ones? There is no such thing as pure justice, Clara whispered. Not when the ones who hold the scales are the same as the ones who sin. No. That afternoon, Elias rode into town. White, Allen, and Doyle still smiled, shook hands, preached, and wore their masks of holiness. The townsfolk whispered, Clara, who knows? A woman like that must have done something. Elias clenched his fists. That night, he wrote a series of anonymous letters, enclosing copies of Clara's journal to major newspapers. One original he buried beneath the old oak tree, just in case he did not live to tell the story. The next morning, Pastor White came to his door with his gentle smile. I only wish to help her find her faith again. Elias looked him in the eyes. No, he said slowly. She does not need that any more. When White left, Clara whispered, trembling, He did not recognize me. Elias answered softly, It is not because you are forgettable, Clara. It is because he has pretended to be righteous for so long. That Sunday, Elias did not go to church. He and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun set red behind the snowy mountains, the colour of truth burning quietly within them. Do you still believe in God? Clara asked. Elias was silent for a long time. Then he said, I still believe, but I no longer think he lives in that church. Maybe he lives among the broken ones, the ones still trying to save each other. Time passed. Rumours spread across the region. Mayor Allen lost his re-election, Sheriff Doyle was investigated, and Pastor White kept preaching, but his voice trembled. No one was convicted, but doubt had already set fire in the hearts of the people. Clara slowly healed. One snowy morning she said, I have to go. I need to start over. Somewhere, no one knows who I am. Elias walked her to the crossroads. Between the wind and snow, they said no goodbye. When her figure disappeared into the white, Elias went back inside and knelt before the dying fire. He knew justice might never come, but truth would never die. And sometimes, a wounded faith is how God lets us see him clearer than ever before. That winter, the wind from the mountains cut like knives. Inside the lonely cabin, Elias and Clara lived quietly, reading the Bible only the parts about kindness and forgiveness. One foggy morning, the sound of hooves broke the silence. Elias stepped onto the porch. Pastor Abram White appeared, his cloak covered in snow, that familiar gentle smile on his face. Elias, "It has been a while since you came to church," he said. "Faith cannot survive in isolation." "No," Elias replied softly. "Sometimes community is where people hide their sins." "And the girl you rescued?" White asked, eyes probing. "She has found peace," Elias said, his tone cold. White smiled gently, almost tenderly, but it was terrifying. "If something troubles your soul, come to confession. Every secret will be kept." "I will remember that," Elias said, his smile never reaching his eyes. When White disappeared into the mist, Clara stepped out and whispered, "He cannot even remember the face of his own sin." Elias laid a hand on her shoulder. "It is not because you are forgettable. It is because he has worn the mask of a saint for far too long." That night, in the cold, they sat by the fire, reading the Bible in trembling voices, a prayer that needed no church, only truth. Time passed, and Ash Hollow changed not through courts or gunfire, but through whispers. The letters Elias had sent spread across the West. Newspapers began to write about a corrupted town. No one said its name, but everyone knew. Pastor White still preached every Sunday, but his voice shook, his eyes unfocused. Mayor Allen withdrew from public life. Sheriff Doyle died alone. No one was convicted, but the silence of Ash Hollow weighed heavier than any sentence. Elias never returned to church. "I have found God elsewhere," he said. And indeed, God was there, in the eyes of the woman who had lost everything, yet still dared to speak the truth. Clara moved north, living quietly. Sometimes she sent letters to Elias, words shared between two souls who had walked through hell, yet still believed in goodness. Before his final breath, Elias whispered, "God is not always in the sermons of those who claim to speak for him, but in the faint voice of the one who dares to tell the truth. And sometimes the holiest act is not to pray, but to listen. If you believe that truth is always worth speaking, like, subscribe, and share, so we can keep telling stories that no one can turn away from."